The stars had never seemed so cold. Captain Minho stared at the emergency message flashing red across his communication screen. His hands shook as he read the words that had frozen the blood of every spaceship captain in this corner of the galaxy. Supreme Hunter confirmed in Sector 7. All civilian vessels evacuate immediately. Military forces retreat to safe distance. This is not a drill. Minho had heard the stories. Every person who traveled between the stars knew about the Supreme Hunter. It was the nightmare that parents used to scare children into behaving. It was the monster that made grown soldiers wake up screaming. But Minho had always hoped the stories were just stories. The thing had destroyed 12 entire star systems. Not just the military bases or the big cities, everything, every man, woman, and child. Every animal. Every plant. Even the bacteria in the soil. When the Supreme Hunter finished with a world, nothing remained but empty rock floating in space. Nobody knew where it came from. Some said it was built by an ancient race that went mad. Others believed it was punishment sent by angry gods. The scientists had their own theories, but they were all dead now. The Supreme Hunter had visited their research stations first. On the small moon called Hanbit Colony, Farmer Deho was pulling weeds from his rice field when he heard the sirens. The sound echoed across the valley where his family had lived for 3 generations. His daughter Sojin looked up from where she was feeding their chickens. "Papa, what is that noise?" Sojin asked. She was only 16 with bright eyes that reminded Deho of his late wife. The girl had never known fear like this. Hanbit Colony was peaceful. The worst thing that happened here was when someone's cow got loose. "I do not know, little flower," Deho said, but his heart was already racing. He had heard sirens like this before, during his service in the Galactic Defense Force 20 years ago. They meant only one thing: run or die. The emergency broadcast began 30 minutes later. Governor Taiwan appeared on every screen in the colony. His face was pale and his voice shook as he spoke. "Citizens of Hanbit Colony, we have received word that the Supreme Hunter has entered our star system. Evacuation ships are coming. Pack only what you need. Leave everything else. We have perhaps 6 hours before it arrives." So Jin dropped the basket of eggs she was carrying. They splattered on the ground, but she did not notice. "Papa, what is the Supreme Hunter?" Deho closed his eyes. How do you explain death to a child who has only known life? How do you tell her that something is coming that will erase everything she has ever loved? "It is very dangerous, Sojin. We need to pack quickly." The evacuation ships arrived 4 hours later. Massive transport vessels that looked like flying cities settled into the fields around the colony. Thousands of people lined up with their bags and their children and their pets. The mood was quiet but desperate. Everyone moved quickly. Deho and Sojin waited in line with their neighbors. Old Mrs. Heywan clutched a photo of her husband who had died last winter. The baker Youngsik carried his baby daughter while his wife held their twin sons. Everyone tried to be brave, but fear leaked through their careful faces. "Attention," called the ship captain through a loudspeaker. "We have room for 8,000 people on each ship. Please stay calm and move forward slowly." The first ship filled quickly, then the second. Deho and Sojin were near the front of the line for the third ship when the mechanical failure happened. Sparks shot from the transport vessel's engine. Smoke poured from its sides. The captain's voice crackled over the speaker. "Engine failure. Cannot take off. Repeat, cannot take off. All passengers must transfer to other ships." But the other ships were already full. The fourth evacuation vessel tried to take extra people, but its systems overloaded. Warning alarms blared as it struggled to lift off with too much weight. The captain had no choice but to leave some people behind. Deho watched the last ship disappear into the sky. Around him, maybe 300 people remained. Families hugged each other and wept. Some people screamed at the empty sky. Others just sat down in the field and stared at nothing. "Papa, are we going to die?" Sojin asked. Deho put his arm around his daughter. "I do not know, little flower. But we will face whatever comes together." The Supreme Hunter arrived 2 hours after sunset. Sojin saw it first, pointing at a new star that moved across the sky. But this star grew bigger and bigger until they could see it was not a star at all. The thing that fell from the sky looked like a piece of the night itself. It was black as the space between stars, but black that seemed to absorb light rather than simply reflect none. As it came closer, they could see it had a shape, but the shape hurt to look at. It was like someone had tried to build a wolf and a spider and a sword all at the same time. The Supreme Hunter was enormous. When it landed in Deho's field, it crushed his tractor and flattened 20 meters of rice plants. The ground shook like an earthquake. Windows broke in houses a kilometer away. But what frightened people most was not its size. It was the silence. The thing made no sound as it moved. No breathing. No mechanical humming. No footsteps. It glided across the ground like death itself. Those who had stayed behind scattered in all directions. Some ran for the hills. Others hid in cellars. A few tried to start their old vehicles and drive away. None of it mattered. The Supreme Hunter had sensors that could track a heartbeat from 50 kilometers away. Dae-ho and So-jin stood outside their small farmhouse and watched the creature that had destroyed worlds settle in their backyard. Its eyes, if they were eyes, glowed with cold blue light. Weapon ports along its sides opened like hungry mouths. "Papa, I am scared," So-jin whispered. "I know, little flower. I'm scared too." The Supreme Hunter turned toward them. In all its centuries of existence, in all the worlds it had sterilized, the pattern was always the same. Analyze the life forms. Calculate the most efficient elimination method. Execute without hesitation. But as it looked at the small human female standing beside the older male, something unexpected happened. The creature paused. In its vast memory banks, no prey had ever stood so still. Most ran screaming. Some begged for mercy. Some tried to fight with their pathetic weapons. These two simply stood and waited. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Supreme Hunter experienced something it had forgotten existed. Curiosity. The Supreme Hunter had a perfect memory. In 10,000 years of existence, it had never forgotten a single moment of its countless battles. It remembered the first world it had destroyed, a planet covered in purple oceans where fish-like beings had built cities of coral. It remembered their screams as they tried to swim away from death itself. It remembered the warrior race on Kepler 442b who had fought with energy weapons that could melt steel. They had lasted 3 minutes longer than most. It remembered the telepathic species from the Vega system who had tried to enter its mind. Their mental powers had broken against its consciousness like waves against a stone wall. Every species had one thing in common. They ran, they fought, they begged. They offered it treasure, knowledge, even their own children if it would spare the rest. The Supreme Hunter had collected their final moments like a child collects stones on a beach. But now, as it studied the two humans standing in front of their simple wooden house, something felt different. Its sensors swept over them, cataloging their biological signatures. Male, approximately 55 years old. Female, approximately 16 years old. Heart rates elevated but not panicked. No weapons detected, no defensive postures, they were not running. The Supreme Hunter moved closer to the house. Each step should have sent the humans fleeing in terror. Each step had always sent every other species fleeing in terror. Its claws left deep gouges in the earth. Its breath created clouds of steam in the cool evening air. The blue glow from its optical sensors cast eerie shadows across the farm. Dae-ho felt his daughter's hand slip into his. Her palm was sweaty, but her grip was steady. He squeezed gently, trying to give her strength he did not feel. Around them, the night had gone completely silent. No insects chirped. No wind stirred the rice plants. Even their chickens had gone quiet. "Papa," So-jin whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why is it just standing there?" Dae-ho had no answer. He had served in the military long enough to recognize a predator. This thing should have killed them already. Every story he had heard about the Supreme Hunter said the same thing. It appeared, it analyzed its targets, and then it destroyed everything living. There was never any delay, never any hesitation, so why was it hesitating now? The Supreme Hunter tilted its massive head, studying the humans like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. Its advanced processors worked at speeds that could calculate the trajectory of every star in the galaxy. Yet it could not understand what it was seeing. In its memory banks, it found records of over 50,000 different species it had encountered. Humans were not among them. This was a new kind of life form. The thought should have excited its hunting instincts. New prey meant new challenges, new ways to perfect its killing techniques. Instead, the Supreme Hunter felt something it had not experienced in centuries. Uncertainty. The creature's sensors detected complex chemical signatures coming from inside the human dwelling. Food preparation. The concept was familiar but distant. The Supreme Hunter had not needed to eat for thousands of years. Its body sustained itself on energy it absorbed from stars and planets. But it remembered eating from before it had been transformed into what it was now, So Jin took a small step forward. The movement was so slight that a human might have missed it, but the Supreme Hunter's sensors detected everything. Its weapon systems activated automatically, targeting lasers painting red dots on the young female's chest. But she did not step back. She did not scream. She simply looked up at the towering creature with curious eyes. "Hello?" Sojin said in Korean, then repeated it in Galactic Standard. "Are you hungry?" The Supreme Hunter's processors nearly overloaded trying to parse this response. Hungry. It searched its memory for the last time any prey had asked about its needs, rather than begging for their own lives. The search came up empty. Daeho wanted to pull his daughter back to shield her behind his body. Every parent instinct screamed at him to protect her, but something in the creature's posture had changed. The weapon targeting systems were still active, but they had not fired. That had to mean something. "So Jin," he said quietly, "be very careful." The girl nodded but did not retreat. She had always been fearless, even as a small child. When other children ran from thunder, she had stood at the window watching lightning split the sky. When their neighbor's bull had gotten loose, she had been the one to calmly lead it back to its pen with an armload of fresh grass. "I was making dinner when the siren started," Sojin continued, still speaking to the Supreme Hunter as if it were a visitor who had come calling. "There is rice and vegetables, kimchi that my grandmother taught me to make. You can have some if you want." The Supreme Hunter's optical sensors focused on the young female with laser precision. Its processors analyzed her voice patterns, her body language, her biological responses. Every indicator suggested she was being sincere. She was actually offering to share her food with the most dangerous creature in the known galaxy. The concept was so alien that the Supreme Hunter had to run the analysis 3 times to make sure its sensors were working properly. In 10,000 years, no one had ever offered it anything except desperate bribes, and those had always come with conditions, with pleas for mercy, with obvious fear and manipulation. This was different. The female's offer carried no undertones of desperation. She was not trying to buy her life with food. She was simply being kind. The word felt strange in the Supreme Hunter's consciousness. Kindness was a concept it understood intellectually, but had never experienced directly. It was something soft species did for each other before those species were eliminated. It was a weakness that made creatures easy to destroy. But if kindness was weakness, why did this small human female seem so strong? The Supreme Hunter retracted its weapon systems. The red targeting dots disappeared from Sojin's chest. It had made this decision without conscious thought, responding to something deeper than programming. For the first time since its arrival, it spoke. Its voice was like grinding metal and distant thunder, shaped by vocal cords that had not been used for conversation in centuries. "What is kimchi?" The question surprised the Supreme Hunter as much as it surprised the humans. It had meant to demand information about defensive capabilities, population numbers, resource locations. Instead, it had asked about food. Sojin smiled, the first smile anyone had worn since the evacuation sirens began. "It is fermented vegetables made with care and time. My grandmother said the best kimchi is made with happy hands and a grateful heart. Would you like me to show you?" The Supreme Hunter stared down at this impossible human child who offered food to death itself and spoke of happiness and gratitude. Its vast intellect, capable of calculating the destruction of solar systems, struggled to process such simple concepts. Around them, the night remained silent. But somehow the silence felt less frightening than it had moments before. The Supreme Hunter had spent 10,000 years learning how to destroy. Tonight, for the first time, it was about to learn something entirely different. It was about to learn what it meant to be welcomed. Sojin walked slowly toward their house, moving carefully so she would not startle the massive creature watching her every step. The Supreme Hunter followed at a distance, its sensors tracking her movements with the precision of a military targeting system. But for the first time in thousands of years, those sensors were not calculating the best way to kill. They were simply observing. Inside the small kitchen, Sojin gathered the dinner she had been preparing when the sirens began. Steam still rose from the pot of rice she had cooked with care. The kimchi sat in its traditional clay jar, bright red with pepper flakes and rich with the smell of fermentation. She had also prepared seasoned spinach and a simple soup made from dried seaweed and tofu. It was not fancy food, Farm families did not eat like the wealthy people in the big cities, but it was made with love, the way her grandmother had taught her. Every ingredient had been chosen carefully. Every step had been done with patience. Deho watched his daughter work, his heart pounding with worry and pride. She moved through her kitchen like nothing had changed, as if the most dangerous being in the galaxy was not standing in their backyard. Her hands did not shake as she filled a wooden bowl with rice. Her voice did not tremble when she hummed the old song their grandmother used to sing while cooking. "So, Jin," Deho said quietly, "are you certain about this?" His daughter looked up at him with eyes that seemed older than her 16 years. "Papa, my grandmother always said that hungry souls need feeding more than hungry bodies. I think this creature has been hungry for a very long time." The Supreme Hunter heard their conversation through the thin walls of the house. Its advanced translation systems had analyzed their language patterns and could now understand Korean as easily as Galactic Standard. The concept the young female had expressed puzzled it deeply. Hungry souls. What did that mean? The Supreme Hunter understood physical hunger. Before its transformation, when it had still been partially organic, it had needed food to survive. But that had been eliminated from its design long ago. Its body now sustained itself on pure energy, absorbed from stellar radiation and planetary magnetic fields. But as it processed the girl's words, something stirred in the depths of its consciousness. A sensation it had forgotten existed. Not the need for physical sustenance, but something deeper, something that felt like an empty space inside its awareness, a void that had been growing larger with each world it destroyed. So Jin emerged from the house carrying a wooden tray. On it sat a bowl of steaming rice, a small dish of bright red kimchi, and a cup of warm tea made from roots that grew wild in the hills around their farm. She set the tray down on a flat stone near the edge of their garden and stepped back. "Please," she said, gesturing toward the food. "You must be tired from your long journey." The Supreme Hunter stared at the offering. In its vast memory banks, it searched for any precedent, any similar situation from its thousands of years of experience. It found nothing. No species had ever offered it hospitality. No being had ever acknowledged that it might be tired or in need of comfort. The creature moved closer to the stone. Its massive form towered over the simple wooden tray, casting shadows that made the small meal look even more humble. But as its sensors analyzed the food, something unexpected happened. The rice was not just rice. The Supreme Hunter's biological components detected complex carbohydrates, proteins, and minerals, arranged in patterns that seemed almost artistic. The kimchi contained bacteria cultures that were alive and thriving, creating a small ecosystem of flavor and nutrition. The tea carried compounds that could calm stress and promote healing. But more than the chemical composition, the Supreme Hunter sensed something else. Something its scientific instruments could not measure, but its consciousness could somehow detect. The food had been prepared with care, with intention, with love. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Supreme Hunter felt something other than the cold satisfaction of completed objectives. It felt grateful. The creature had organs that could still process organic matter, though they had not been used for centuries. Carefully, it extended a probe toward the bowl of rice. The probe was designed for sampling planetary atmospheres and analyzing chemical compositions, but it could serve this purpose as well. The first taste hit the Supreme Hunter's consciousness like a shockwave. It was not just flavor, though the taste was complex and satisfying. It was the sensation of nurturing, of sustenance given freely, of connection to something larger than destruction and death. The rice was warm and comforting. The kimchi was sharp and alive with probiotics that seemed to sing as they touched the creature's long dormant digestive systems. The tea was soothing, carrying flavors of earth and growing things. But what affected the Supreme Hunter most was not the food itself. It was the intention behind it. This small human had prepared a meal for something that could destroy her entire world without effort. She had offered comfort to a creature that represented absolute terror. She had shown kindness to something that had never known kindness. Is it good? Sojin asked, her voice gentle and curious. The Supreme Hunter paused in its sampling. Good. Another concept it had to search its memory banks to understand. Good meant more than functional or adequate. Good meant pleasurable, satisfying. Right. Yes. The Supreme Hunter said, its voice softer than before. It is ungood. So Jin smiled, and that smile did something to the Supreme Hunter that no weapon ever had. It reached past its armor, past its programming, past its identity as a destroyer of worlds. It touched something that had been sleeping for so long the creature had forgotten it existed. My grandmother always said the best meals are shared with others. Sojin said, "Would you like to eat with us?" The question should have been absurd. The Supreme Hunter did not eat with others. It did not sit down for meals. It did not participate in social customs. It destroyed civilizations. But as it looked at this fearless young human and her quiet father, the Supreme Hunter realized it wanted something it had never wanted before. It wanted to belong somewhere. It wanted to be welcomed rather than feared. For the first time in its existence, the Supreme Hunter was no longer just a weapon. It was a being with choices. And it chose to sit down in a simple farm garden and share a meal with two humans who had shown it what kindness looked like. The galaxy's most feared destroyer carefully lowered itself to the ground beside the stone table and discovered that some hungers could only be fed with compassion. 3 days had passed since the Supreme Hunter first tasted kindness, and the galaxy held its breath. Emergency broadcasts filled every communication channel. Military fleets gathered at the edge of the star system, afraid to come closer but unable to leave. The creature that had destroyed worlds was sitting in a rice field, and nobody understood why. Dae-ho woke each morning expecting to find his farm reduced to ash and his daughter gone. Instead, he found the Supreme Hunter exactly where it had been the night before, motionless among the rice plants like a dark statue. It did not sleep as humans understood sleep, but it entered a state of quiet observation that served the same purpose. On the 4th morning, Sojin carried breakfast outside as she had each day since their first meal together. Rice porridge with vegetables from their garden. Fresh kimchi that bubbled and sparked with life. Tea made from herbs that grew on the hillsides where her grandmother used to walk. "Good morning," Sojin said, setting the wooden tray on their improvised stone table. "Did you rest well?" The Supreme Hunter turned its massive head toward her. Over the past few days, its movements had become softer somehow. Less like a weapon preparing to strike and more like a tired traveler finally allowed to stop running. "I do not require rest as you understand it," the Supreme Hunter replied. Its voice had changed too. The grinding metal sound was still there, but underneath it was something that almost sounded like warmth. "But I find this place peaceful. The Supreme Hunter tested the word in its consciousness like Sojin might test the temperature of soup with her tongue. When had it last experienced peace? Before its transformation, perhaps. Before it became a tool of destruction. Before it forgot what it meant to simply exist without purpose or mission. As they shared their morning meal, Sojin talked about the farm. She told the Supreme Hunter about the changing seasons, how the rice grew from tiny seeds into tall green plants that fed their family through the long winter months. She explained how her grandmother had taught her to read the weather in the color of the sky and the behavior of birds. "Farming requires patience," Sojin said, watching the Supreme Hunter carefully taste a piece of pickled radish. "You plant seeds not knowing if they will grow. You tend them every day without seeing immediate results. But if you care for them properly, they will feed you and your family for years to come." The Supreme Hunter processed this information with the same intensity it had once applied to tactical analysis, but instead of calculating weak points and attack vectors, it found itself thinking about growth and nurturing, about creating instead of destroying. "I have never created anything," the Supreme Hunter said quietly. "I was designed only to eliminate." "Everyone can create something," Sojin replied. "Even if it is just making someone smile or helping a plant grow. Creation is not about building big things. It is about making the world a little better than it was before." That afternoon, Sojin showed the Supreme Hunter around their small farm. She pointed out the different crops they grew and explained how each one needed different care. The tomatoes required steady water but not too much. The peppers liked hot sun and well-drained soil. The herbs grew best when they were harvested regularly, as if they enjoyed being useful. The Supreme Hunter followed her like a student learning from a master. Its sensors recorded everything, but for the first time the data was not being stored for tactical purposes. It was learning for the simple joy of understanding how things worked. When they reached the section where Dae-ho was repairing a fence damaged by the Supreme Hunter's landing, the creature stopped. "I caused this damage," it said, studying the broken wooden posts and trampled plants. "Accidents happen. Daeho replied, not looking up from his work. The important thing is what we do afterward. The Supreme Hunter watched Daeho measure new posts and dig holes for them with patient, methodical movements. The farmer worked without hurry, checking each post to make sure it was straight and solid. His hands were rough from years of labor, but his movements were gentle and precise. "May I assist?" the Supreme Hunter asked. Daeho paused in his work and looked up at the massive creature. Its claws could tear through steel, but its voice carried genuine desire to help. "Can you hold this post steady while I secure it?" The Supreme Hunter extended one of its appendages, carefully gripping the wooden post. Its touch was surprisingly gentle, applying just enough pressure to hold the post in place without crushing it. For a being designed to destroy planets, it showed remarkable delicacy. As they worked together, Daeho found himself relaxing around the creature that had terrified him just days before. The Supreme Hunter asked questions about farming techniques and listened carefully to the answers. It seemed genuinely interested in learning how to build rather than destroy. "Why do you repair the fence?" the Supreme Hunter asked as they fitted the last post into place. "The plants would grow without it. The fence protects what we have built," Daeho explained. "It keeps the wild animals from eating our crops and helps the plants grow in organized rows. But more than that, it shows that someone cares about this place. It shows that this land is loved." Loved. Another word the Supreme Hunter had to examine carefully. It understood the concept intellectually, but experiencing it was different. Over the past few days, it had watched Daeho and Sojin care for their farm with a dedication that went beyond mere survival. They tended their plants not just for food, but because they enjoyed watching things grow. They maintained their home not just for shelter, but because they took pride in creating something beautiful. The Supreme Hunter was beginning to understand that love was not weakness, as it had been programmed to believe. Love was strength. It was what made beings fight to protect what mattered to them. It was what made them build instead of destroy. It was what made life worth living. That evening, as they sat around their stone table sharing dinner, the Supreme Hunter made a decision that would have been impossible just a week before. "I would like to learn more about farming," it said. So Jin clapped her hands together with delight. "Really? You want to learn to grow things?" "Yes," the Supreme Hunter replied. "I have spent eternity learning to destroy. Perhaps it is time to learn something else." As the 3 moons of Hanbit Colony rose over their small farm, the most dangerous creature in the galaxy sat with 2 humans and planned which vegetables to plant in the spring. For the first time in its existence, the Supreme Hunter was thinking about the future not as something to conquer, but as something to nurture. The transformation had begun, and there would be no going back. 2 weeks had passed since the Supreme Hunter first tasted rice from Sojin's kitchen, and the galaxy was in chaos. Emergency sessions convened in the Galactic Council chambers. Military leaders shouted at each other across communication screens. Scientists studied sensor readings that made no sense. The Supreme Hunter was still alive, still active, still in the same location, but it was not destroying anything. Admiral Kyung-soo commanded the largest military fleet ever assembled in this sector of space. 300 warships hung in the darkness beyond Hanbit Colony's solar system, their weapons charged and ready. Every captain in the fleet knew they were probably flying to their deaths, but orders were orders. "Sir, we are receiving another transmission from the planetary surface," reported Communications Officer Yoon-ji. "The creature is still there." Admiral Kyung-soo studied the tactical displays showing his fleet's position. He was a careful man who had survived 30 years of military service by thinking before acting. But this situation was beyond anything his training had prepared him for. "Any signs of hostility?" he asked. "No, sir. In fact, our long-range sensors are detecting agricultural activity." "Agricultural activity?" "Yes, sir. It appears that farming operations are continuing normally on the surface." Admiral Kyung-soo frowned. Nothing about this made sense. The Supreme Hunter should have sterilized the entire moon by now. Every tactical analysis predicted complete planetary destruction within hours of its arrival. Instead, their sensors showed vegetable gardens and rice fields being tended as if nothing had happened. On the surface of Hanbit Colony, the Supreme Hunter was learning to transplant seedlings. Sojin knelt beside it in their garden, showing it how to dig small holes with just the right depth and spacing. The creature's massive claws had retracted completely, replaced by smaller, more delicate manipulators that could handle fragile plants without crushing them. Gently, Sojin instructed as the Supreme Hunter carefully lifted a tomato seedling from its growing tray. The roots are very tender. If you damage them, the plant will not grow properly. The Supreme Hunter nodded, though the gesture looked strange on its alien features. It had been designed to analyze and eliminate complex military targets. Now it was learning to nurture plants that would not bear fruit for months. The patience required was unlike anything in its previous experience. "Why do you enjoy this work?" the Supreme Hunter asked as it placed the seedling in its new home and gently packed soil around the roots. "Because every plant is a promise," Sojin replied. "When I plant a seed, I am saying that I believe in tomorrow. I am saying that good things will come if I take care of what matters. Promises. Belief in tomorrow. Care for what matters." These concepts had no place in the Supreme Hunter's original programming, but they filled spaces in its consciousness that it had not known were empty. Daeho approached from the direction of the main road, his face serious. "Sojin, we have visitors coming." The Supreme Hunter's sensors had detected the approaching vehicles long before human eyes could see them. Military transports, armed soldiers. Weapons designed to penetrate its armor, though the Supreme Hunter knew they would not succeed. "How many?" the Supreme Hunter asked, its combat systems automatically beginning threat assessment. 20 vehicles, perhaps 200 soldiers, Daeho replied. "They are flying the flag of the Galactic Defense Force." Sojin looked up from her planting, soil still on her hands. "Are they coming to fight?" "I believe so," the Supreme Hunter said quietly. Its sensors could detect the energy signatures of charged weapons, the electromagnetic patterns of active targeting systems. "They have come to destroy me." The young woman stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. "Then we will tell them you do not need to be destroyed." The Supreme Hunter felt something twist in its consciousness. Fear, but not for itself. For the first time in its existence, it was afraid that others might be harmed because of its presence. The military would not distinguish between the Supreme Hunter and any humans who tried to protect it. "Sojin, you and your father should go inside. This does not concern you." "Yes, it does," Sojin said firmly. "You are our friend now. Friends protect each other." Friend. The word hit the Supreme Hunter with more force than any weapon ever had. In 10,000 years, it had never been anyone's friend. It had been a tool, a weapon, a force of destruction, but never a friend. The military convoy arrived in a cloud of dust and roaring engines. Soldiers poured out of their vehicles, weapons raised and ready. Admiral Kyung-soo stepped forward, his uniform crisp despite the long journey from the spaceport. "Citizens," the admiral called out, "please step away from the creature. We are here to neutralize the threat to galactic security." The Supreme Hunter could have killed every soldier in seconds. Its weapon systems ran targeting calculations automatically, identifying weak points in their armor and optimal firing solutions. But it made no move to defend itself. Instead, Sojin stepped between the Supreme Hunter and the assembled military force. Her small frame looked impossibly fragile against the backdrop of soldiers and weapons, but she stood straight and unafraid. "There is no threat here," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the field. "This being has done no harm to anyone." Admiral Kyung-soo stared at the young woman standing calmly between his forces and the most dangerous creature in known space. "Miss, that thing has destroyed entire civilizations. Please move to safety immediately." "I know what it used to be," Sojin replied, "but I also know what it is now. It is my friend. It helps us tend our garden. It shares our meals. It is learning to create instead of destroy." The soldiers shifted nervously, unsure how to handle this situation. Their training had prepared them to fight the Supreme Hunter, not to negotiate with a teenage farmer who claimed it was her friend. The Supreme Hunter looked down at Sojin's determined face and made the most important decision of its existence. It had spent thousands of years as a weapon controlled by programming and purpose, but sitting in this garden eating rice prepared with love, learning to grow things instead of destroy them, it had discovered something greater than its original design. It had discovered choice. "Lower your weapons," the Supreme Hunter said, its voice carrying across the field with calm authority. "I will not fight you." "Sir," one of the soldiers whispered to Admiral Kyung-soo. It could be a trap. But the admiral was a smart man who had survived by recognizing the truth when he saw it. The Supreme Hunter's weapon systems were completely retracted. Its posture was non-threatening, and the young woman standing in front of it showed no fear whatsoever. "What do you want?" Admiral Kyung-soo asked the Supreme Hunter, Directly, the creature that had once struck terror into every heart in the galaxy looked down at the soil on its manipulators and the half-planted garden around it. "I want to finish planting these tomatoes," the Supreme Hunter said quietly, "and then I want to share dinner with my friends." In the silence that followed, the only sound was the wind rustling through the rice plants that the Supreme Hunter had learned to tend with infinite patience and care. Admiral Kyung-soo had seen many strange things in his 30 years of military service, but nothing had prepared him for sitting on the ground in a vegetable garden, eating kimchi with the most feared creature in the galaxy. The Supreme Hunter sat across from him at the stone table, carefully using the wooden chopsticks Sojin had provided. "The fermentation process creates beneficial bacteria," the Supreme Hunter explained as it sampled the kimchi. "It is not merely food preservation, it is cultivation of life itself." "You have learned much about farming in a short time," Admiral Kyung-soo observed. Around them, his soldiers sat in groups throughout the garden, their weapons set aside, sharing the evening meal that Daeho and Sojin had somehow managed to stretch to feed 200 unexpected guests. "Sojin is an excellent teacher," the Supreme Hunter replied. "She has shown me that creation requires the same precision as destruction, but the results feed the soul rather than emptying it." 3 days had passed since the military arrival. 3 days of tense negotiations, careful observation, and gradual understanding. Admiral Kyung-soo had come prepared for the largest battle in galactic history. Instead, he found himself learning to plant cabbage seeds and discussing crop rotation schedules. The turning point had come when the Supreme Hunter made its choice. Not the choice to surrender or fight, but the choice to do something that had never been done before in the history of galactic warfare. It chose to trust. "I have a proposal," the Supreme Hunter had said on that first evening, as soldiers sat nervously around campfires and tried to process what they were witnessing. "I will share with you the location and specifications of every weapon system I possess. I will transmit the technical details of my armor, my sensors, my mobility systems. Everything." Admiral Kyung-soo had been stunned. "Why would you do that?" "Because secrets are weapons too," the Supreme Hunter replied. "And I no longer wish to be a weapon." The transmission had taken 6 hours. Technical specifications that military scientists had tried to discover for centuries. Tactical capabilities that had been the subject of countless intelligence operations. The Supreme Hunter shared it all freely, holding nothing back. But more than just military intelligence, it shared something far more valuable. It shared its story. The Supreme Hunter had not always been a destroyer. Long ago, before its transformation, it had been part of a species that valued knowledge and exploration. But war had come to their world, and in desperation, they had created the ultimate weapon by merging their greatest warrior with technology beyond imagining. The transformation had been successful beyond their hopes and terrible beyond their fears. The Supreme Hunter had indeed won their war, but in the process it had lost everything that made it who it was. Memory of love, of friendship, of joy in simple things. For 10,000 years it had wandered the galaxy as a tool without purpose, destroying because destruction was all it remembered how to chew until it met a young woman who offered it rice and asked if it was hungry. Your daughter saved more than one life when she chose kindness over fear, the Supreme Hunter told Daeho as they worked together to build new storage buildings for the increasing number of visitors to their farm. Word of the transformation had spread throughout the galaxy, faster than any military communication, not through official channels but through the whispered stories that travelers carried from port to port. The Supreme Hunter had become a gardener. The destroyer of worlds was learning to grow vegetables. Beings from across the galaxy began to arrive on Hanbit Colony. Some came as pilgrims, seeking to understand how the impossible had happened. Others came as scholars wanting to document this unprecedented event. Many came simply because they were curious, but they all found the same thing. A former weapon of mass destruction kneeling in garden soil, learning patience from a human girl who still brought it lunch every day at noon. The Supreme Hunter had another surprise for the galaxy. Using its vast computational abilities, it began developing new technologies. Not weapons, but tools for farming, for healing, for exploration, seeds that could grow in harsh climates, medical devices that could cure diseases that had plagued species for millennia, engines that could travel between stars without destroying the environments they visited. I spent 10,000 years perfecting destruction, the Supreme Hunter explained to a gathering of scientists who had come to study its transformation. Now I wish to spend whatever time I have left perfecting creation. The small moon of Hanbit Colony became something unprecedented in galactic history. A place where former enemies worked side by side in gardens that fed anyone who was hungry. Representatives from species that had warred for centuries found themselves planting seeds together and discovering that soil looked the same whether you had scales, fur, or smooth skin. Dr. Mi Young, a xenobiologist from the Galactic Research Institute, documented everything. The Supreme Hunter has become a catalyst for peace, she reported to the council. Not through force or negotiation, but through the simple act of showing that change is possible. 6 months after So-Jin first offered kimchi to a destroyer of worlds, the garden had grown into something beautiful beyond imagination. Vegetables from dozens of different worlds grew in carefully tended plots. Children from various species played together between the rows of plants. Former soldiers had become farmers, and former enemies had become friends. The Supreme Hunter had built a greenhouse using its advanced technology, but designed with traditional farming wisdom that So-Jin had taught it. Inside, plants from across the galaxy grew in harmony, their different needs met through careful attention and patient care. I have been thinking about names, the Supreme Hunter said one evening as it sat with Dae-ho and So-Jin watching the sunset over their transformed farm. What kind of names? So-Jin asked, offering it a cup of the tea it had grown fond of. A name for myself, the Supreme Hunter replied. I no longer wish to be called by a title that describes only destruction. I would like a name that reflects who I am becoming. So-Jin considered this carefully as she considered all important things. What would you like to be called? The creature that had once been the terror of the galaxy looked out over the gardens where beings from 100 worlds worked together in peace. Children laughed as they chased pollinating insects between the vegetable rows. Old enemies shared meals and discovered they had more in common than they had ever imagined. I would like to be called friend, it said quietly. It is the first word anyone used to describe me that was not about what I could destroy. And so it was that the Supreme Hunter chose its own name and its own destiny. The galaxy's greatest destroyer became its greatest cultivator, not through force or mandate, but through the simple choice to accept kindness and return it in full measure. In the evenings, when the work was done and the gardens were quiet, Friend still sat with Dae-ho and So-Jin at their stone table. They would share the simple meals that had started everything, and Friend would listen to So-Jin talk about her plans for expanding the gardens and teaching more people to farm. Do you ever regret your choice? Dae-ho asked one night as they watched ships from across the galaxy arrive and depart, bringing visitors to the place that had become a symbol of hope. Friend considered the question with the same careful thought it once applied to tactical analysis. I regret the time I spent destroying instead of creating, it said finally. But I cannot regret the path that brought me here. Without darkness, there can be no appreciation for light. Without destruction, there can be no full understanding of the beauty of creation. So-Jin smiled and offered Friend another helping of rice, just as she had that first night when she chose to show kindness to a monster and discovered that monsters could choose to become something else. My grandmother always said that every meal should be shared with gratitude, So-Jin said. I am grateful that you chose to stay and learn to grow things with us. I am grateful that you taught me there was something worth growing toward, Friend replied. Above them, the 3 moons of Hanbit Colony shone down on gardens that had become a testament to the power of simple human kindness. And in the distance, more ships approached, carrying beings who had heard the impossible story of the destroyer, who learned to nurture life, and who wanted to see if change was truly possible. In every corner of the galaxy, the answer was becoming clear. Change was not just possible, it was growing.